If I can do video.
Mute myself.
So anyway, speaking of Hanukkah and Hanukkah foods, we get to do the story of Judith today. Has anyone read the story of Judith before?
No.
Oh, good. First time for everything. So the story of Judith, it's a very interesting story. We'll delve into some of the details in a second. I got a message from Sandy. Yeah, she'll be here in a minute. She's lighting some candles. Very nice. And so there's a tradition for Hanukkah, we know, about having latkes, about having sufganiyot, really anything fried, right, is part of the Hanukkah experience. But there was also a tradition that developed in the Middle Ages to have cheese during Hanukkah as well. That dairy and blintzes and cheese, dishes and cheese pancakes were part of the Hanukkah experience. And so tonight, because it is the Book of Judith, very nice. A little cheese plate for the rabbi today.
What are your glasses?
A little manchego.
That looks delicious.
A little manchego, a little port salut, a little drunken goat, and a little sotat shene al tartufu, a little bit of truffled cheese. That'll be a nice little accompaniment today. Got a little honey here as well. And of course, because it is the Book of Judith, l'chaim. A little Sauvignon Blanc. So that'll be very nice for us today. This will all make sense in a few moments. So the Book of Judith is a very interesting work for a number of reasons. It's an apocryphal work, so let's just define our terms. So when the Bible was being canonized and organized and being put together, there were some books that were in, the canon and some books that were left out. So for example, one of the most famous examples of this that we speak about during Hanukkah are the books of Maccabees. So books of Maccabees 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, they are not in our canon. The rabbis chose to exclude them from the Hebrew Bible, from the Tanakh, the 39 books that are in our Bible. But the Catholics included them in their Bible, and the Protestants got rid of them, so they didn't use them. So you have these collection of sacred texts that are not sort of in our scriptures, but they're in the Catholic Bible, and that's called Apocrypha, these books that are sort of left out of the Hebrew canon. Judith falls right into that category. And Judith itself, it's a very, again, interesting story. It's fictitious. That's off the top. It's not a real story, but it's a book about the Israelites, a victory over their enemy, and it's achieved by a beautiful and pious woman with, of course, the help of God. The author of the Book of Judith, he appropriates, I'm assuming it's a he, so I'm going to use he for this. He appropriates, and imitates biblical text in a way. He uses figures and events and verses from the Tanakh, which gives the book a biblical feel, right? Even though it's not necessarily a biblical text. And there's a lot of irony and exaggeration with it, a lot of liberties taken with the history and the geography of the land of Israel. And one gets the sense that that's on purpose. It's sort of deliberately inaccurate to let you know that it's not meant to be taken literally. Like other stories in the Bible, Judith is a salvation story, meaning that it's about how the Israelites were saved from an enemy. And it's very much influenced by the Exodus narrative. It's influenced by, stories in the books of Judges, among other biblical episodes. The story of the book, we have the Israelites who are under threat by Nebuchadnezzar. If you remember King Nebuchadnezzar, he's actually very clearly and very historically a Babylonian king. In this book, he's actually made Assyrian. For what reason, I do not know, other than the fact that, again, the author might have been having a little bit of fun with us. He sends out his chief of staff, his main general, to lead an armed conquest of the entire region. People who have irked him for various reasons. Nebuchadnezzar wants some revenge, sends out this guy on a quest to basically kill all of his enemies and to pay them back for them not joining up with him in other campaigns and other quests. So that's the main bad guy here, is a guy named Holofernes. Holofernes is the antagonist of the story. So this gets to the land of Israel. The people are terrified, and they need to have some kind of savior here. And eventually that is Judith. Judith steps up to the plate and devises a plan that will save the Israelites from certain destruction. So that is our narrative today. Why is it read during Hanukkah? The book probably dates right around Hanukkah, right around the Hasmonean period. That's the formal name for the Maccabees. That's the Hasmonean dynasty. So it's probably written around them. The terminology that's used in this book, some of the different words, they ring to that time period. There are other little like similarities. Judah, Maccabee, Judith being the hero of the book, some similarity there, in addition to some other sort of nuances. The book itself was never actually, we shouldn't say never. We don't have a historical Book of Judith that was written in Hebrew. Our earliest copies of the book were written in Greek, and it went from Greek to Latin. So with that said, it's a very clearly Jewish text made for Jewish audiences. So we might suppose there is a Hebrew version of it somewhere that's been lost to history, but our earliest known actual manuscript of the text starts in Greek. It was in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Bible. But we know, again, it was for a Jewish audience because of just the story itself about the Israelites. And so we really do have that sense that even though it was a Jewish story, it wasn't written in Hebrew, which might be a reason why it wasn't included in the canon, wasn't included in the Hebrew Bible. And we get a lot of stories from Judith in the Talmud and later Jewish works. So again, we know it exists, but it was only until that 10th, 11th century when it really became popularized and linked with Hanukkah because of those connections to the Hasmonean times. And so it also might not have been included because, again, between it being written late, between the Greek, maybe, Judith as a character wasn't as appealing to some of the rabbis. Too independent, too feminist, these like sort of stories of female leads, maybe a little redundant with Esther, who knows? But it wasn't used in the Bible that we have it. Judith herself is a fascinating paradoxical figure. She's wise, she's pious, she's greatly respected in the community, as we'll see, but she's also seductive, deceitful, and a little bit, as we'll see, violent in the text. And so she sort of plays with both of those different biblical paradigms. And so we have females in the Bible, female heroines that have different, parts of their personality that are all found in Judith. You have Devorah in the Book of Judges, sort of the wise judge and warrior. You have Yael or Delilah, also sort of strong sort of female figures that are more in the femme fatale kind of category. And also, as we mentioned, a little bit like Esther as well. So we have a little bit of that. Judith is, we see over and over again, she fears God, but she also shows that fear and reverence of God must be met with action. So you can have faith and trust in God, but you know what? Sometimes you got to do a little bit of the dirty work yourself. As we'll see with Judith, that it's definitely the case. And this book was certainly one that was read probably again around the holiday of Hanukkah, and to uplift and to inspire, due to this, again, salvation story of the Israelites being saved. Do you have a question? Oh, I'm hearing some feedback. Okay. So with all that said, let's dive in.
That's okay. Thank you for making it.
Okay.
Tomorrow is Wednesday. What time are you?
I just got to mute Tony for a second. There we go. Okay. So we have our screen. Everyone sees what we're looking at? Yeah, I'm going to take that as a yes. Bonnie, you want to begin for us? You got to unmute.
Okay. Rabbi, is there any way you can make it a little bit bigger?
Let me see here.
Last week I had trouble too. Perfect. Okay. Much better. In the 18th year, on the 22nd day of the first month, there was talk in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, about carrying out his revenge in the whole region. He summoned all his minister and all his nobles and set before him his secret plan and recounted fully with his own lips all the wickedness of the region.
This jumps right in, right? And you see this again, this geographical, historical error here where he's noted as the king of the Assyrians, when again, he's quite famously a Babylonian king. But he's a little cranky, and so he's sort of devising a plan to pay back everyone he doesn't like, to exact some kind of revenge. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Bonnie, you want to keep going?
When he had completed his plan, Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, called Holofernes,
Good enough. Yep, that's how I would say it. So it's good for me.
the chief general of his army, second only to himself, and said to him, "Thus says the great king, the Lord of the whole earth, leave my presence and take with you men confident in their strength, 120,000 foot soldiers and 12,000 cavalry. March out against all the land to the west, because they disobeyed my orders."
Indeed.
So Holofernes left the presence of his Lord and summoned.
A little bit bigger for you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yep.
There we go. Go ahead.
Okay. So Holofernes left the presence of his Lord and summoned all the commanders, generals, and officers of the Assyrian army. He mustered the picked troops by division, as his Lord had ordered him to do, 120,000 of them, together with 12,000 archers on horseback. And he organized them as great an army as marshaled for a campaign. He took along a vast number of camels and donkeys and mules for transport, and innumerable sheep and oxen and goats for food. Also ample rations for everyone, and a huge amount of gold and silver from the royal palace. Then he set out with his whole army to go ahead of King Nebuchadnezzar and to cover the whole face of the earth to the west with their chariots and cavalry and picked foot soldiers. Along with them went a mixed crowd like a swarm of locusts, like the dust of the earth, a multitude that could not be counted.
Thank you very much. You see here that they're not messing around. And we can see similarities to the idea of the Greek forces being so massive during the story of the Maccabees. You also might get here some notes of the Exodus story about the Pharaoh and his army, but also the Israelites, right? And that they went with a mixed multitude. Locusts are one of the plagues, and the Israelites compared to locusts, like bugs in the beginning of the Exodus narrative, because they are everywhere in the land of Goshen, right? And so they are just like spreading out everywhere. So you see some of those little callbacks, to the Exodus story. But I think the main thing to take away from this sort of introduction is they're not messing around here. Like they are amassing a huge force to try to exact their payback on those who they feel have slighted them or are standing in their way. Thank you, Bonnie, for that. I'm just gonna move this up a little bit. Tony, you want to pick up from here? Got to unmute you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
When the Israelites living in Judea heard of everything that Holofernes, the general of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Assyrians, had done to the nations, and how he had plundered and destroyed all their temples, they were therefore greatly terrified at his approach. They were alarmed both for Jerusalem and for the temple of the eternal their God, for they had only recently returned from exile, and all the people of Judea had just now gathered together, and the sacred vessels and the altars and the temple had been consecrated after their profanation. So they sent word to every district. They immediately seized all the high hilltops and fortified the villages on them and stored up food in preparation for war.
Yeah, so you see here that the author tries to put this in some historical context, right? So we know that in this story, it's right after they returned from exile, right? And so we can say the author's trying to date this around 536 BCE, in that maybe that Persian time period, though obviously we don't know when, because it just says, it was after, this happened, recently returned. We don't know what recently means necessarily in this context, but the idea that they're back, right? They're back and they have the temple established again. The connection I didn't mention to the temple is also important is the connection between this story and Hanukkah, when Hanukkah is all about the rededication of the temple. And here there's a lot of conversation about the temple and temple service and sacrifices, and all these like sacred vessels that need to be protected from perhaps an incoming attack. And here we do get a sense that there is some military strategy that the Israelites do possess, right? And so, like Israel does now, we have the high ground, that helps, right? So you have the high ground, you have the hilltops, and you fortify, what you need to fortify, and you're getting ready for a siege, right? You're getting ready for them to perhaps attack. So you want to make sure that you have all your food stored up. Tony, you want to keep going? Give me one more paragraph here?
Sure. The high priest Joachim, who was in Jerusalem at the time, wrote to the people of Bethulia, ordering them to seize the mountain passes, since by then Judea had been invaded, and it would be easy to stop any who tried to enter, for the approach was narrow, wide enough for only 2 at a time to pass.
Excellent. And so we get, again, a high priest, Joachim, and he sort of sends a missive out to Bethulia, the town of Bethulia. Did anyone ever visit Bethulia when they were in Israel? The answer is no, you didn't, because it doesn't exist. It's not a place. But, for our purposes, it's a place that in the story, but it is completely fictitious. But the idea that they have this area where you can't get through, if you've seen, again, like other movies and other sort of stories where if for an army to get through, if you have a place you can channel people, right, so they can only march in 1 line or 2 lines, you can pick them off with arrows if you have the high ground, because they can't come on en masse, so it's a strategy, and Bethulia seems to be, for the purposes of our story, sort of a gateway, an entrance to the land. And so they need that place in particular to be shored up. They need that place to be strong, because it's going to be a high point in their defense of the entire land of Judah. Okay, let's see here. I'm going to make a little, Debbie, you need it a little bigger? Hold on, Debbie, you're muted.
I can't even see what you guys are reading. My story here, or the words are frozen.
The words are frozen up here.
Yeah, I just got. All I see is when he completed his plan. I'm going to switch computers and go into the other room.
Okay, fair enough. We'll see you in a moment then. Okay. Okay, good. Marilyn Warner, are you there? Not sure. We'll keep going. Melissa and Tyler, you're up.
We're here. So the Israelites did as they had been ordered by the high priest Joachim and the Senate of the whole people of Israel in session at Jerusalem. And Israel cried out to God with great fervor, and they humbled themselves with much fasting. They all put sackcloth around their waists and prostrated themselves before the temple, and put ashes on their heads, and spread out their sackcloth before the Eternal.
Just to mention here that the people of Israel are going to be doing traditional mourning practices, right? They are praying, they're crying out to God, they're putting on sackcloth and ashes, so again, as I mentioned, this is for a Jewish audience. These are traditional Jewish mourning practices. Melissa, you can keep going.
The Eternal heard their prayers and had regard for their distress, for the people fasted many days throughout Judea and in Jerusalem before the sanctuary of the Almighty. The high priest Joachim and all the priests who stood before the Eternal and ministered to the Eternal with sackcloth around their loins offered the daily burnt offerings, the votive offerings, and free will offerings of the people. With ashes on their turbans, they cried out to the Eternal with all their might to look with favor on the whole house of Israel.
Okay, so we're all in trouble. We're mourning. You know, we're getting worried here. Okay, that's very good. Tyler, do you want to pick up?
Okay.
We scroll down a little bit.
It was reported to Holofernes, the general of the Assyrian army, that the people of Israel had prepared for war and had closed the mountain passes and fortified all the high hilltops and set up barricades in the plains. In great anger, he called together all the princes of Moab and the commanders of Ammon and all the governors of the coastland and said to them, "Tell me, you Canaanites, what people is this that lives in the hill country? How large is their army? Who rules over them as kings and leads their army? And why have they alone of all who live in the west refused to come out and meet with me?"
Very nice. So Holofernes is a little bit ticked off. You know, he doesn't understand what's happening here because he's getting a little bit more resistance than he expected from the Israelites. And so he calls together some other generals here. We remember from the biblical text that Moab and Ammon are not exactly buddy-buddy with the Israelites. These are people they're not fans. So they make natural teammates, natural partners in a struggle against Israel. So just drawing upon some of the big baddies of the Bible to help out Nebuchadnezzar and Holofernes in this attack. And so again, like a good general, he wants to know what's happening. Give me some intel, give me some insight on what's going on here with these Israelites, these tricky Israelites.
I'm back.
Okay, good. Nice to see you back, Debbie. Very nice. Okay. Let me just see here. Oh, I got another. Okay. Cool. Sharon, you want to begin this big run here?
Okay. Then Achior, the leader of, is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Okay. The leader of all the Ammonites said to him, "May my lord please listen to a report from the mouth of your servant. I will tell you the truth about this people that live in the mountain district near you. These people are descended from the Chaldeans.
Chaldeans, yep.
Yep. At one time, they lived in Mesopotamia because they did not wish to follow the gods of their ancestors who were in Chaldea. Then their God commanded them to leave the place where they were living and go to the land of Canaan."
Okay, let's just pause right there for 1 second.
Okay.
Who are we talking about here? This is Abraham. This is the Abrahamic narrative. Abraham was born in the Chaldeans. You know, he was from Ur of the Chaldeans. And then Lech Lecha, right? Their God commands them to leave the place where they were living to go to the land of Canaan. So he's actually giving us the biblical narrative. Achior is giving us the background that we know, right, as Jewish people and that the Israelites sort of know. But maybe the Assyrian guy doesn't know what the deal is. And so he's giving him Bible 101. He's giving him, this is the story of the Jewish people in brief, but it's still the story of the Jewish people, right? So that's Abraham. Sharon, keep going.
Sure. Then their God commanded them to leave the place where they were living and go to the land of Canaan. There they settled and grew very prosperous in gold and silver and very much livestock. When a famine spread over the land of Canaan, they went down to Egypt and lived there as long as they had food.
And that's Jacob, right? And Joseph, right? That's the Joseph narrative. There's a famine in the land, and they're going to go down to Egypt. So now they're in Egypt. Okay, let's keep going.
There they became, hold on.
Sorry, I'll scroll down.
It's moving, so I'm losing my place. Hold on.
Here.
Okay. There they became so great a multitude that their race could not be counted. So the king of Egypt became hostile to them. He exploited them and forced them to make bricks. They cried out to their God, and he afflicted the whole land of Egypt with incurable plagues. So the Egyptians drove them out of their sight. Then God dried up the Red Sea before them, and he led them by the way of Sinai and Kadesh Barnea.
There's Exodus, right? So now we just left
Yeah.
Egypt, right?
Yeah.
It's just fascinating. And they keep going. They drove out all, this is not the Israelites doing the driving out. Go ahead.
They drove out all the people of the desert, and crossing over the Jordan, they took possession of all the hill country. They drove out before them the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Shechemites, and all the Gergesites, and lived there a long time.
Thank you, especially for all those sites at the end and the ites and the sites and everything else. Good job. So again, this is the Israelite narrative, right? And so after the exodus from Egypt, they go out and they war with the tribes of the desert, and eventually they cross the Jordan, right? They cross the Jordan, take possession of the land in the hill country, and they fight and they war with all of these ites, and they have the land. Very nicely done. Okay, Achior's got a lot to say. He's got a lot to talk about. So let's see here. Who do I have next on this thing? Actually, Debbie, is that you? You're back?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yep. You want to pick up over here?
Okay, that last part sounded like a Reader's Digest version of the Bible.
Indeed it is. And it's a little bit more to go.
As long as they did not sin against their God, they prospered, for the God who hates iniquity is with them. But when they departed from the way he had prescribed for them, they were utterly defeated in many battles and were led away captive to a foreign land. The temple of their God was razed to the ground, and their towns were occupied by their enemies. But now they have returned to their God and have come back from the places where they were scattered, and have occupied Jerusalem, where their sanctuary is, and have settled in the hill country because it was uninhabited.
Okay, and so you see here the prophetic narrative, right? The people sinned and they were punished, and then God sort of allowed that to happen because God hates sin and the Israelites were doing the wrong thing. And the temple was razed by the aforementioned Babylonians, and their towns were occupied by their enemies. The Assyrian conquest, followed by the Babylonian conquest. But now, hey, things are peachy keen. Things are back. They've returned to their God. They're doing well, and they've sort of reoccupied the land and may even spread out a little bit more in the hill country. Okay, Debbie, you want to finish this last part over here? So now?
Okay, so now, my master and Lord, if there is any oversight in this people and they sin against their God, and we find out their offense, then we can go up and defeat them. But if they are not a guilty nation, then let my Lord pass them by. For their eternal God will defend them, and we shall become the laughing stock of the whole world.
Okay, and so here's the important theological point that Achior is bringing in, and it's going to be a point that drives a little bit more of the narrative, that Achior is telling Holofernes that even though the Assyrian army is great and strong and mighty and powerful, and they're swarming and defeating people, it doesn't matter. It's up to the Israelites and their behavior. If the Israelites are behaving well and they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, then God's going to protect them, God's going to help them, and God's not going to let them be defeated. But if they've sinned, if they're causing problems, then it'll be a bigger issue, and God will allow the Israelites to be defeated. Hold on for 1 second. Benji had not one, but 2 maracas. Very easy to hear, obviously. He's banging them on the door.
He wants to come in.
He wants to come in very badly, as is his want. And he's having a grand old time, it sounds like. Okay, so that is Achior's narrative. Achior is basically giving the history of it and trying to explain to Holofernes that, again, the Israelites can't be defeated if they are doing God's will, if they're doing the right things. Okay, that was spectacular. David, how you doing? Are you there? Can you unmute? I can't hear you because you're muted still. Disappearing. Hey, Susan.
Okay,
hey.
Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
All right. When Achior had finished saying these things, all the people, excuse me, all the people standing around the tent began to complain. Holofernes' officers and all the inhabitants of the seacoast and Moab insisted that he should be cut to pieces. They said, "We are not afraid of the Israelites. They are a people with no strength or power for making war. Therefore, let us go ahead, Lord Holofernes, and your vast army will swallow them."
Indeed.
When
He's
the
the counterpoint.
Should I go on?
Yeah.
When the disturbance made by the people outside the council had died down, Holofernes said to Achior, "Who are you, Achior, to prophesy among us as you have done today and tell us not to make war against the people of Israel because their God will defend them? What God is there except Nebuchadnezzar? He will send his forces and destroy them from the face of the earth. They cannot resist the might of our cavalry. We will overwhelm them. Their mountains will be drunk with their blood, and their fields will be full of their dead. Not even their footprints will survive our attack. They will utterly perish. So says King Nebuchadnezzar, Lord of the whole earth."
Okay, so he's not mentioned. And so you will see that Achior is not a popular guy anymore. Achior has sort of lost his popularity with this group. The people want him chopped up into little pieces for speaking such things. And then, Holofernes basically says, "Get out of here. This is terrible." And again, we hear the callback to Exodus from Egypt, right? Pharaoh sees himself as a god. And the Exodus can be seen as that struggle between the Israelite God and the Egyptian gods and the battle for divine supremacy. And so here you see that similar idea. Nebuchadnezzar, according to Holofernes, is God. So what does he have to fear from the Israelite God, right? And so that's going to be part of the struggle here, the divine struggle in this moment. And of course, again, a little bit poetic. Mountains will be drunk with blood, not exactly a very happy sentiment. Okay. Thank you for that. We'll keep on moving. Carolyn, you want to read a little bit or no? You got to unmute. There you go.
"As for you, Achior, you shall not see my face again from this day until I take revenge on this race that came out of Egypt. Now my slaves are going to take you back into the hill country and put you in one of the towns. You will not die until you perish along with them." Then
little rough, giving him the old heave ho, getting the boot from the Assyrian.
"My God is stronger than your God."
Yes, exactly right. You want to read a little more?
Sure. "Then Holofernes ordered his slaves who waited upon him in his tent to seize Achior and take him away to Bethulia and hand him over to the Israelites. Then the Israelites came down from their town and found him. They untied him and brought him into Bethulia and placed him before the magistrates of their town, who in those days were Uzziah, the son of Micah of the tribe of Simeon, and Chabris, son of Gothogiel, and Charmis, the son of Mechiel. They set Achior in the midst of all their people, and Uzziah questioned him about what had happened. He answered and told them what had taken place at the council of Holofernes and all that he had said in the presence of the Assyrian leader, and all that Holofernes had boasted he would do against the house of Israel.
Yeah, so now Achior is almost like it's like a spy almost in a way. He's been kicked out of the Assyrian army, and now he's with the Israelite community, and basically giving them the lowdown of what had transpired. And so now the Israelites are better prepared, but they're also terrified. We're going to skip a little bit, because I want to be cognizant of time. This is a pretty long story. So just as a summary here, Holofernes gets all of his army together. They're marching down, and then they come up with an idea that the Israelites have a problem. As we mentioned about the channel, sort of the tunnel to come in, the downside of that, it's harder to get supplies as well. Hence, making a siege. So what they are going to do now is that they are going to make camp around the town at the base, instead of make camp there, and then cut off their water supply. So there's a spring there. So they're cutting off the spring so there won't be any water for the people. So you don't have to actually attack them. They'll all just die of thirst. That becomes the plan. The Israelites, of course, very sad. They cry out to God and say, hey, this is going to be terrible. And they didn't have any water to drink. And the people now are disheartened because of this really bad set of circumstances. And they come to Uzziah over here. The people sort of yell at him and say, what are you doing to us? This is terrible leadership, because now, we have the choice of either dying of thirst or being killed or being enslaved. So you know what? Let's give up. Let's surrender. Let's just be slaves to the Assyrians. It's better than dying here. And Uzziah says, you know what? Give me 5 days. Give me 5 days. And if I can't figure it out then, fine, we'll give up. We'll call it a day. Say we can't win. And we'll surrender to the Assyrians. So that's now, after all of that preamble, we have finally come to the heroine of our story, to Judith. And so now let's meet Judith. Sandy, you want to pick up there?
Sure. Now in those days, Judith heard about these things. She was the daughter of Merari. Her husband Manasseh, who belonged to her tribe and family, had died during the barley harvest. Judith remained as a widow for 3 years and 4 months at home. She put sackcloth around her waist and dressed in widow's clothing. She fasted all the days of her widowhood. She was beautiful in appearance and was very lovely to behold. Her husband Manasseh had left her gold and silver, men and women slaves, livestock and fields, and she maintained this estate. No one spoke ill of her, for she feared God with great devotion.
It's really interesting, just as a note, that Judith gets this really big introduction. I mean, can you think of another biblical figure that gets as much of an introduction as Judith does? I mean, it's really a lot. We get the backstory. We get that she's a widow. We get that, that she's beautiful, that she's rich, and that she is well respected, all in that paragraph. That's with a little bit of editing. We get a lot of information about who Judith is as a person. So the author really introduces us, to this person who's very clearly going to be the heroine of the tale, right? So we built up all of the drama, right? And we're at the low point in the story for the Israelites. My God, we're all going to die. But wait, Judith is here. And Judith, can't get a better name, by the way, right? Judith Yehudit, so she is the archetypal Jew, right? Yehudit, so now Judith is going to come to save the day. And Sandy, you want to keep going a little more here? When Judith heard?
Sure. When Judith heard the harsh words spoken by the people against the ruler, she sent her maid to summon Uzziah and Chabris and Sharmis, the elders of her town. They came to her and she said to them,
There's a pause before you even get to this sentence. Think about how much power and influence she must have had. They came to her, okay? She sent out her servant and said, bring me the town leadership, post haste, get them over here. And, Uzziah, Shabris, and Charman, so to come in here, Sharbis, come in to have the conversation. So that's pretty tough. She's got a lot of sway, apparently. Okay, sorry to cut you off there, Sandy.
Okay. They came to her and she said to them, listen to me, rulers of the people of Bethulia. What you have said to the people tonight is not right. Who are you to put God to the test today and to set yourselves up in the place of God in human affairs? Do not try to bind the purposes of the eternal our God, for God is not like a human being, to be threatened, or like a mere mortal, to be won over by pleading.
It's a fascinating statement that she's making here, because the people are basically saying, hey, look, It's in God's hands. Whatever God wants to do, if God sees us fit, to stay alive and to win, God will help us prevail. But if not, so be it. And Judith is like, how dare you? How dare you sort of test God in this game of putting it all in God's hands? It's not in God's hands, right? It's also in our hands. Yes, pray, but maybe pray and, bring an umbrella if it's raining. You have to take some action yourself. So that's really good. Thank you for that, Sandy. Marilyn Warner, you're back. You're here.
I'm back.
Excellent. You want to give a little read here?
Sure. For never in our generation, nor in these present days, has there been any tribe or family or people or town of ours that worship the gods made with hands, as was done in days gone by. That was why our ancestors were handed over to the sword and to pillage, and so they suffered a great catastrophe before our enemies. But we know no other God but God, and so we hope that God will not disdain us or any other nation.
Keep going.
In spite of everything, let us give thanks to the eternal our God, who is putting us to the test as he did our ancestors. Remember what he did with Abraham and how he tested Isaac, and what happened to Jacob in Syria and Mesopotamia while he was tending to the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother. For God has not tried us with fire as God did them, to search their hearts, nor has God taken vengeance on us, but the Eternal scrounges those who are close to him in order to admonish them.
Okay, let's pause right there. So the first paragraph, very interesting, because she basically says, and to me it's interesting, she's like, you know what? We're actually better than our ancestors. None of us, did like they do, that they did in the past. None of us do what they have done. We don't worship idols anymore, like some of our ancestors might have done. We're good. That's why our ancestors were handed over, because they screwed up a lot. We're doing okay. We're monotheistic. We believe in God. We're God-fearing people. So that's a good start. Let's pray again. But remember that sometimes God tests us. And, sketchy theology aside, this is part of their whole concern. That, sometimes God tests us. That's the natural order. We can't test God, but God can test us, right? And so, brings up Abraham, brings up Jacob, these different biblical figures who are put to the test. And so again, she's given a little biblical history as well. Marilyn, give me one more paragraph, then Uzziah.
Sure. Then Uzziah said to her, all that you have said was spoken out of a true heart, and there is no one who can deny your words. Today is not the first time your wisdom has been shown, but from the beginning of your life, all the people have recognized your understanding, for your heart's disposition is right.
Okay, and so Uzziah feels heartened by the conversation. We're going to fast forward a little bit. Judith is beginning to hatch a plan, right? She has an idea in her mind of what she wants to do, because she's going to go out with her maid, right? She's going to go out, and within 5 days, she's going to deliver victory to the people. She's better than dominoes. She's going to deliver really easily for the people. She's going to go in, she's going to do her thing, but doesn't want to share her plan, being a little secretive, but she has an idea of what she wants to do. She's already gotten that far in her imagination. Judith, as any good Jewish person will do, is going to pray now. She has this long sort of prayer to God to protect her and also to sort of forgive her for her actions, because she has this plan in place that she's going to do. Again, she prays a while. Then after she prays, again, perhaps in a callback to Esther, Judith had stopped crying out to the God of Israel. She called her maid, took off her widow's garments, put those aside. Time to get ready, So is she going to dress like a soldier right now to go off to war? Not really. Going to bathe her body with water, anoint herself with precious ointments, run a comb through that hair, put on a tiara, dressed in her festive attire she used to wear in the good old days, put on some sandals. Got to have some nice footwear, put on some sandals, some anklets, some bracelets, some rings, some earrings, all her other jewelry, making herself very beautiful to entice the eyes of all the men who might see her. Okay, and so now she's leaving. She also grabbed a kosher to-go bag which is going to come into play a little bit later because Judith's going to be hungry, right? You're going to go for a couple days. You have to have a nash. And so she grabs a skin of wine and a flask of oil, fills a bag with roasted grain, some fig cakes, delicious, a little fine bread, wrapped up all of her OU kosher kit and gave them to the maid and took it to go, right? And as long as she has a little bit of food, she's going to get a nice little send-off here from Bethulia, the people of the town, and Uzziah, giving her a little blessing. May the God of our ancestors grant you favor and fulfill your plans, so that the people of Israel may find glory and Jerusalem may be exalted. So she bows down to God and she begins to schlep. Doesn't take her long, so she leaves, and then pretty quickly, because the Assyrians are right there, right? They've gathered at the base of the mountain. She gets arrested. She gets busted by the Assyrian police here, and they take her into custody. What are you doing? To what people you belong? Where are you going? I'm a daughter of the Hebrews, but I am fleeing from them, for they are about to be handed over to you to be devoured. So I'm on my way to see Holofernes, the commander of your army. Give him a report. Let him know what's going on. Like Achior gave the Israelites, remember the report earlier. Now it's a little bit flipped. She's going to now give the report to Holofernes and show him the secrets, the secret way to get in and capture all of the hill country without losing one man. And so they sort of have a little bit of rabble-rousing here, but there's great excitement in the camp. Oh, this Israelite woman here is going to betray her people. Let's bring her to Holofernes. Okay, and now we get into the heart of the matter here. Holofernes and all of his servants came out and led her to the tent. He was resting on his bed with a canopy that was woven with purple and gold, only the finest for Holofernes, emeralds and other precious stones. When they told him of her, that he came to the tent, he came to the front of the tent, silver lamps carried before him. When Judith came to the presence of Holofernes and his servants, they all marveled at the beauty of her face. Aww. Okay, it's very, very nice. It's not exactly a meet cute, but it's what we got. Linda White, are you there? I don't see you. I see darkness. Okay, I don't hear from Linda, so I think we're back up to now everyone's out of order. Okay, Tony, you want to pick up here?
Sure. Then Holofernes said to her, "Take courage, woman, and do not be afraid in your heart, for I have never heard anyone who chose to serve Nebuchadnezzar, king of all the earth. But now tell me why you have fled and have come over to us."
Okay, keep going.
Judith answered him, "Accept the words of your slave and let your servant speak in your presence. I will say nothing false to my lord this night. By the life of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the whole earth, and by the power of him who has sent you, direct every living being. Not only do human beings serve him because of you, but also the animals of the field and the cattle and the birds of the air will live because of your power under Nebuchadnezzar and all his house. For we have heard of your wisdom and skill, and it is reported throughout the whole world that you alone are the best in the whole kingdom, the most informed and the most outstanding in military strategy."
Excellent. What does this sound like?
Flattery.
Flattery, definitely. And I'll add an extra word here. A little flirting.
She's being a woman.
A little flirting. Holofernes, your army is so huge. You have such a great and strong forces. And the king you serve, he's just so awesome. Oh my goodness. She is enraptured by Holofernes and all of his cool stuff. You are just the most awesome. You have the greatest army. You're the best. You're the most wise, Holofernes. And so she's playing a little game here, perhaps, I would say.
She's a smart lady. Smart lady.
Very true indeed. She's not messing around here. Bonnie, you want to pick up over here? You got to unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
Now, as for Archior's speech in your council, we have heard his words. For the people of Bethulia spared him, and he told them all he had said to you. It is true. Indeed, our nation cannot be punished, nor can the sword prevail against them unless they sin against their God. But now a sin has overtaken them by which they're about to provoke their God to anger when they do what is wrong. Since their food supply is exhausted.
Phone call, someone does. Okay, here we go. Keep going.
Since their food supply is exhausted and the water has almost given out, they have planned to kill their livestock and determined to use all that God, by his laws, has forbidden them to eat. They have decided to consume the first fruits of the grain and the tithes of the wine and oil, which they have consecrated and set aside for the priests who minister in the presence of our God in Jerusalem. So when I, your slave, learned all this, I fled from them.
As we just heard, she's a smart lady, right? And so she's actually giving him a plausible reason, right? An excuse, because Achior had already given Holofernes this speech that the Israelites can't be destroyed or defeated unless they sin. Well, Judith is saying, hey, you know what? They got a big sin coming here, right? They're going to disobey the laws of Leviticus that are laid down about designating the first fruits and the first of the animals and livestock to God. They're going to eat it. And why are they going to eat it? Because they're hungry, right? They're hungry and they're going to be, they're starving out a little bit because of the siege. So they're going to do this, which is still a big no-no. So now Holofernes has ammunition, right? He has the knowledge that he needs about the Israelites and their practices, and saying that this is why, she fled, because she knows once they do this, the people are going to be dead meat. They're going to be dead in the water here. So that's why she left. Bonnie, you want to give me the last paragraph?
So, my Lord, I will remain with you, but every night your servant will go out into the valley and pray to God. God will tell me when they have committed their sins. Then I will come and tell you, so that you might go out with your whole army, and not one of them will be able to withstand you.
A very interesting paragraph for a number of reasons. So you know what, Holofernes? Gosh, I think you're swell, and so I'll stay with you here in your tent. But at nighttime, when sort of after the sun goes down, I'm not going to stay in your tent, really. I'm not that kind of girl. I'm going to go out in the fields, and I'm going to pray, and I'm going to try to connect with God during this time. And then once I figure that out, I'll let you know what's going to happen. So during the daytime, we can hang out together. When it's nighttime, I'm going to go out and I'm going to pray, and I'm going to let you know what's going on. I'm going to give you the intel. Interesting, to say the least, I would say. Okay, Sandy, you want to pick up here?
Sure. Her words pleased Holofernes and all his servants. Then Holofernes said to her, God has done well to send you ahead of the people, to strengthen our hands and bring destruction on those who have despised my Lord. You are not only beautiful in appearance, but wise in speech. If you do as you have said, you shall live in the palace of King Nebuchadnezzar and be renowned throughout the whole world.
Okay, keep going.
Then he commanded them to bring her where his silver dinnerware was kept, and ordered them to set a table for her with some of his own delicacies and with some of his own wine to drink. But Judith said, I cannot partake of them, or it will be an offense, but I will have enough with the things I brought with me.
Treif, right? I can't be eating your chazarai here, because it's not kosher. I have my own little kosher kit. Remember, it's a callback to what we had before. So I can't eat your food and drink your wine. Thank you very much, but no thank you. I got my fig cakes. I got my bread. I got my oil, got my wine. I'll be all right. I'm only going to be here a few days, right? Because you're going to go kill everybody in 5 days, right? And so I got enough to last me. A little fig cake for breakfast, a little bread for lunch. I'll be fine. I eat light under a siege, as we all should. Eat light under a siege. Okay, so then the servants here brought her to the tent, and she takes a little schluff, sleeps until about midnight, and then she gets up, and let my Lord now give orders to allow your servant to go and pray. So the guards don't hinder her, guards don't bother her. She goes out, And so each night she goes out and she prays, she bathes at the spring of the camp. Got to make sure she looks right, you know, for this whole plan here. And then she prays to God to direct her for the way to triumph. So she returned purified and stayed in the tent until she ate her food towards the evening. Maybe a little intermittent fasting as well here. Okay, so now we are getting a little bit late now. We're at the fourth day here. Who's a brave soul here? Sharon, you want to give a little reading here?
On the fourth day, Holofernes held a banquet for his personal attendants only and did not invite any of his officers. He said to Bagoas, the eunuch who had charge of his personal affairs, "Go and persuade the Hebrew woman who is in your care to join us and to eat and drink with us. For it would be a disgrace if we let such a woman go without having intercourse with her. Ooh. If we do not seduce her, she will laugh at us."
Okay, I figured you could. I don't know. I had to pick someone to read this terrible passage.
You didn't even warn me.
Yeah, you see, it's a racy story. And so it's the fourth day. Holofernes has waited a few days, so to speak, you know, and he's getting maybe a little bit tired of waiting, so to speak. Now you'll know he sends all the officers away, right? And the one he has here is the eunuch. And so the eunuch is no threat in this particular situation. And so he's like, you know what? Maybe tonight's the night. You know, she's been outside praying to God all those nights. Maybe tonight can be different. You know, and so that's where we sort of leave it with Holofernes. One more, Sharon.
Okay. So Bagoas left the presence of Holofernes and approached her and said, "Let this pretty girl not hesitate to come to my lord, to be honored in his presence, and to enjoy drinking wine with us, and to become today like one of the Assyrian women who serve in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar." Judith replied, "Who am I to refuse my lord? Whatever pleases him, I will do at once, and it will be a joy to me until the day of my death." So she proceeded to dress herself in all woman's finery. Her maid went ahead and spread for her on the ground before Holofernes the lambskins she had received from Bagoas for her daily use in reclining.
Okay, so we're getting romantic, right? We're setting the scene here. We're in the tent. The lambskins, you know, are all out for reclining, and so we have this now here, and I just love this line of, "Who am I to refuse my Lord? Whatever pleases him, I will do at once. It will be just my joy, my greatest joy, to the day of my death." She's laying it on just a bit thick. But that being said, here we are with Judith and Holofernes. And we're getting PG-13, if not a little bit more. Okay. Melissa, you want to pick up? Sorry, I'm just fast forwarding that here. Then Judith came.
And Judith came in and lay down. Holofernes' heart was ravished with her, and his passion was aroused, for he had been waiting for an opportunity to seduce her from the day he first saw her. So Holofernes said to her, "Have a drink and be merry with us." Judith said, "I will gladly drink, my lord, because today is the greatest day in my whole life." Then she took what her maid had prepared and ate and drank before him. Holofernes was greatly pleased with her and drank a great quantity of wine, much more than he had ever drunk in any one day since he was born. Judith was left alone in the tent with Holofernes stretched out on his bed, for he was dead drunk.
Indeed. So Holofernes had a little bit too much wine to drink in this moment, and he's pretty much passed out. Now, what's not stated in this text, in this part of it, and comes later in the commentaries, is that it says that Judith and Holofernes, they share some food, and she can't share his food, so she shares her food with him, including some mighty strong wine that she packed with her, that we did see in the beginning, right? That she packed some wine with her. But they also said that she packed levivot. And levivot are cheesecakes. They are like ricotta pancakes. At least they were in the Middle Ages. They pack some cheesecakes here. And so Judith has gotten him drunk, but gotten him drunk by using these very salty cheesecakes. And so because they're so salty and because they're so so tasty here, she drinks with him, and then he gets drunk and falls down. And then so now that he is drunk, she is going to then carry out the next part of her plan. Okay, let's see here. Melissa, want to finish up here?
Judith, standing beside his bed, said in her heart, O God of all might, look in this hour on the work of my hands for the exaltation of Jerusalem. Now indeed is a time to help your heritage and to carry out my design to destroy the enemies who have risen up against us.
Okay, indeed. And so that's now the setup here. And now, of course, the ultimate finishing here. Carolyn Gold, you want to pick up here?
Sure. She went up to the bedpost near Holofernes' head and took down his sword that hung there. She came close to his bed, took hold of the hair of his head, and said, give me strength today, O eternal God of Israel. Then she struck his neck twice with all her might and cut off his head. Delicate woman.
Yes.
Then she rolled his body off the bed and pulled down the canopy from the posts. Soon afterwards, she went out, gave Holofernes' head to her maid, who placed it in her food bag.
So the to-go container of kosher food now being emptied, she uses it to carry his head because he's drunk, and then there it goes.
Great story.
The two of them go off together, and they've set up this whole story, right, that they were accustomed for prayer, right? So the guards don't even notice because they're used to it. They're used to her going outside to pray. And so she's able to actually, since that's already the pretense, she's able to leave. She just walks right out, with this guy's head in a bag. And then Judith calls out to the sentries, her own sentries, open the gates, God is with us, and we defeated our enemy. And so they're praising God, amen, amen. And then, here, very pleasant, she pulls out the head out of the bag and shows it to them. And she gets Achior, that's a little later, but she gets Achior to confirm, that this is actually the head of the general, right, of Holofernes, because Achior, remember, was booted out in the beginning of the story, from the Assyrian camp, and now is in the Israelite camp. So Achior is able to, identify the remains here. And the Israelites are victorious and they win. Amen ve'amen. Here. The rest of the story goes, the Assyrians are obviously flummoxed and they're all in trouble. And so the Israelites are able to defeat them in the greater sort of battle because they're fleeing and confused. And then Judith sings a song of praise and redemption, and she lives till 105, never marries, but lives till she's 105, still very respected and very much upheld. For the Israelites. Amen v'amen. And that, my friends, is why we eat cheese during Hanukkah. In recognition of the fact that salty cheese that she uses, to get him in that condition where he's going to drink more. Yeah.
So this is the way. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So this is the way. So this is the way they got ahead in those days.
Yes, indeed.
By a delicate little.
And I think that's obviously a part of the running of the story is that he's taken down by a woman. And of course, like in this time period, that would seem to be a grave insult, obviously, as well, that he wasn't killed by another soldier or whatever it was, that he was put to death by a woman and by a widow at that, someone who would be stereotypically someone who would be looked at as a vulnerable person in society, but turns out not so vulnerable. And not so delicate. Exactly right. She was somebody who had a plan, stuck to it. So you can see why there's some ambiguity here, or some ambivalence here about this text, because it's not exactly a G-rated story. There are some moments we should mention, obviously, in the book of Esther. And certainly, as that story can get a little bit ribald as well as some other texts in the books of Kings. But it certainly has a salacious sort of feel to it. So you can guess why maybe some of the rabbis didn't love that part of it. I honestly think the reason it wasn't included was more for the fact that I'm guessing it was written too late. I'm guessing the Bible had already sort of taken shape by this time the book was actually written. I have to assume that there's a Hebrew text, of this document that we don't have, that it was lost to history. I can't imagine its first writing was in Greek. I would just find that very surprising. This feels like it had to be a Hebrew/Hebrew Aramaic kind of text that was translated into the Greek, as they all were. But I can't imagine that this was meant to be for a Greek audience, obviously. I think it was meant for an Israelite audience, and therefore I'd have to assume it was written in Hebrew. We just don't have it. And this story gets popularized, as I mentioned, like around the time of the Middle Ages, probably because of other persecution issues that were going on during that time. And the parallels between this story and the story of the Maccabees, Judah, Judith, small army, small band overcoming a greater force, a greater power. A couple other, again, similarities that we see, very much a focus on temple service, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of connections, I think, to Hanukkah. And then it just makes for a campy story at the end of the day. Like one can imagine, the Israelites around a kumsitz, around a fireplace, sort of reading the story together and having a good chuckle, but also being inspired, by the heroism of someone who maybe it wouldn't be expected of. But so I think that it was, again, used for that reason to entertain, to have a little fun, a little jocularity, but also to inspire the Israelite community, the Jewish communities as well. Any other final questions? Everyone.
It sounds like the plot of a good opera that'll be at the Met in summer soon.
You know what? One wonders. I don't actually know in terms of how this story was adapted towards the future, but again, it has a very dramatic flair to it, to be sure, and some betrayal and some, so it has sort of that theme building up to it. That's a good point.
Rabbi, do you think that, do we believe that she went with the intent to kill him?
Yes.
Does she actually?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think she's more like one of these hired assassins that are just watching a movie called Ava, and it's about this woman who did that. No, it was just interesting that even, again, from being a woman of prayer and all of that was her thought. I just thought that's interesting.
No, I think it's 100%. I think that's the juxtaposition that is either fascinating or troubling, depending on who you ask, I guess. But that idea is that, as a heroine, sort of as this female figure, she's definitely stereotyped, in a way, but in different ways. So you have this, like, they mention over and over again how beautiful she is, right? So that's sort of a stereotypical sort of way that they would want to view this character. Pious, also very important to the rabbis, but she's also, as I said, sort of a seductress, sort of as well. And she was somebody who was using her looks and her wiles to engineer this situation. And it's very well thought out, right? This isn't a spur of the moment killing. She set up like all the different stages of it, from her food bag to the praying at night, to making sure that no one else was around him for the seduction scene, just trying to, so she engineers this whole thing.
Premeditated.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's premeditated, right? It isn't a spur of the moment action. And then she grabs his head and puts it in the to-go bag, and that's it. And knowing that you take care of the leader, you cut off the head of the snake, so to speak, right? And the body is useless. So it's very much that idea. She took out the leader, and then left them in disarray. So I do 100% think that was the point. And also, again, because of her piety, and it's mentioned later on, in the story, but she wants to make it very clear. She's bringing her kosher food, and she makes it clear to the Israelites that she did not, even though there was this sort of seduction scene, she didn't do anything with him, right? Like she didn't, she didn't commit any act. This was all about sort of like the flirtation and the seduction, but there was no actual implicit act anywhere. And so that way she could remain pious, right, and virtuous. It's a step too far, right? Beheading him is one thing, right? But that being said, in the Latin, so this book goes from Greek to Latin, and in the Latin text, they actually de-emphasize a little bit more of her. They de-emphasize the seductiveness. They sort of tone that part down, and they sort of raise up more about her piety, because that was a little bit more wholesome, I think, for the audience they were looking at as well.
Rabbi, wasn't she made a judge after that?
That a different person. Yeah, that was no. You got it. That's
not Judge Judy.
Yeah, it's another judge. But yes, this was definitely. She has that sort of spirit to her, so one could imagine. I wonder what they do with her in the midrash, whether they or in the later sort of writings, whether they give her more things to do. But she was definitely that she's almost like a judge, because she's this revered elder statesman in the community, right? So she is someone of that very high standing, almost like a judge. Yep. Cool. Any other questions?
Interesting story.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like these different texts that we wouldn't normally get a chance to read, because even though it's our book, it's not in our book, as I like to say. Like this is like the Maccabees. The Maccabees is a Jewish story, but we don't have it in our text. Other people have it in theirs, and while there was reason for it, perhaps I think it's also sometimes fun to delve into these things, to give us a different understanding of our traditions and our holidays. And so all of these people making cheese winces and whatever during Hanukkah. And I might add, by the way, there is a culinary argument to be made that the original latkes were actually cheese pancakes and not potato. There is a culinary study that speaks about that idea, because, and I mentioned this a little bit at the drive-through, that the drive-in Hanukkah event, that what you were frying in makes a difference. So if you were living in a place with olive trees, you were frying in olive oil. So you can fry cheese pancakes to your heart's delight. You can make all the mozzarella sticks you want. But if you were living in a place that didn't have olive trees, you couldn't make cheese pancakes because you were frying in chicken fat. You were frying schmaltz. And because you were frying in schmaltz, you couldn't use the cheese pancakes, so you needed a substitute. And here comes the potato. And so the potato you can fry in whenever you want, because the potato is parve. The potato is a vegetable. So there's a culinary argument. The original latkes were actually cheese. And the potato came later.
Interesting.
Very
interesting.
So there's that question, right, of which latke came first. And so you can find these great recipes. And if one were to go to Rome, Rome is actually a good example. During Hanukkah, they have a lot of cheese pancakes in Rome. And so there's some like European sort of countries that have carried on this tradition of cheese being one of the central foods for Hanukkah. These small communities. And it's also, as one might remember from other stories we've talked about, sometimes we just do things, right? And we don't know why we do them. Like, it's tradition, our grandmother did it, so we do it, but we don't always know the whole story. And so one can make the argument that a lot of people who eat the cheese during Hanukkah might not actually know why. It's one of those things that's gotten passed on from generation to generation instead.
Cool.
Cool.
Good story. Thank you. This
Very good. Thank you, Rabbi.
Next week we can be depressed again with Job, but
Go back to Job.
this week something a little bit different, a little more Hanukkah-y, such that it is Hanukkah-y. I hope everyone again had a nice time with it. Again, it's sort of a fun story. Hope no one is overly scandalized, and we can meet each other again sooner than later. Next week, I don't know if we have Bible study on the calendar, but if people are here, certainly we can do Bible study next week. I'm not going anywhere. So, we can I'll have Pete mention it. But we can certainly do Bible study next week, okay?
Good. Good.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Thank you. Happy Hanukkah, everyone.
Happy Hanukkah, everyone.
Same to you.
Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Bye.